The house had never been loud, but after the funeral, it became silent in a way that felt heavy. It was the kind of silence that pressed against the walls and stayed in the corners, making even daylight feel weak. The little girl noticed it first. She noticed how footsteps sounded different now, how doors closed without care, and how the air felt colder even on warm days, before everything changed. The house had been simple but warm. Not rich, not poor, just enough. The mother had been the heart of it. She woke early every morning, made breakfast, and spoke softly even when tired. She smiled easily, especially at the little girl, who followed her everywhere like a shadow. They laughed together, shared small secrets, and talked about things that did not matter much but felt important at the time. The stepfather had always been quiet. He worked, came home, ate his meals, and spoke little. He was not cruel before, just distant. The mother often filled the gaps with kindness, smoothing over his rough edges with patience. When the little girl asked questions, the mother answered. When the child cried, the mother held her. The house worked because of her presence. Then the illness came. It started small. Tiredness, missed meals, a cough that would not go away. The mother tried to hide it, telling everyone she was fine. She still cooked, still smiled, still tucked the little girl into bed at night. But the maid noticed. She had worked in the house for years, long enough to sense when something was wrong. She saw how the mother leaned on the table when she thought no one was looking. She noticed how her hands shook sometimes. The maid wanted to speak, but the mother asked her not to worry. She said everything would be okay. She always said that it was not okay. The sickness moved fast. One week the mother was resting more than usual. The next she could barely stand. The stepfather became irritated, not scared. He complained about hospital visits, about costs, about inconvenience. The maid stayed quiet, helping where she could, caring for the little girl when the mother was too weak. The little girl did not understand what was happening. She only knew her mother no longer smelled like soap and food, but like medicine and fear. She slept on a small bed beside her mother's, holding her hand through the night. Sometimes the mother cried softly when she thought the child was asleep. The end came quickly. One morning, the house filled with strangers. Quiet voices. Heavy steps. The mother lay still, her face calm but empty. The little girl stood at the doorway holding the maid's hand, not fully understanding why no one would answer her when she called for her mother. The funeral was small. A few neighbors came. Some distant relatives. The stepfather stood stiff and silent. The little girl wore a dark dress that felt too tight and itchy. She held a flower she did not know what to do with. When the coffin was lowered, she asked the maid where her mother was going. The maid did not know how to answer. After that day, nothing felt right again. The stepfather changed almost immediately. Not slowly, not over time. It was as if something inside him snapped. He stopped looking at the little girl. When she spoke, he acted as if he did not hear. Meals became shorter and colder. Sometimes there was no food for her at all, so only leftovers placed on the counter without a word. The maid tried to keep things normal. She cleaned, cooked, and spoke gently to the child. She braided her hair in the mornings, helped her dress, and told her stories at night. But she felt the tension growing, thick and sharp like broken glass. The stepfather did not like the maid's kindness. He watched her closely now. Once, when she gave the child an extra piece of bread, he slammed his hand on the table and told her not to spoil the girl. His voice was loud and angry, nothing like before. The maid lowered her eyes and apologized. But inside, something twisted. The little girl began to shrink. She spoke less. She walked carefully, as if trying not to make noise. She learned quickly that laughter was no longer welcome. When she cried, she did it quietly. Hiding under her blanket at night so no one would hear, she missed her mother every moment. She missed her voice, her warmth, the way she made everything feel safe. Now the house felt like a place she did not belong to anymore. The stepfather started giving her chores. Small at first. Cleaning, carrying things, washing dishes. Then more. Things too heavy for her small hands. When she struggled, he called her useless. When she made mistakes, He punished her with silence or harsh words. The maid watched all of it. She wanted to speak, but fear held her back. She needed the job. She had no family nearby, no savings to fall back on. She told herself it was temporary, that things would get better. She told herself the stepfather was grieving too, but deep down, she knew the truth. One evening, the stepfather came home angry. Something had gone wrong at work. He took it out on the house. He complained about dirt that was not there, food that was fine, noise that did not exist. The little girl stood frozen near the wall, afraid to move. He looked at her and said she was the reason. Everything felt wrong now. The words hit harder than any slap could have that night. The maid sat beside the little girl's bed and held her hand while she slept. The child's face was thin now, her eyes always tired. The maid whispered promises she was not sure she could keep. Days passed. Then Week's neighbors stopped asking questions. Life moved on for everyone else. But inside the house, things only grew worse. The stepfather began staying out late. When he came home, he was cold and sharp. He spoke about money often, about how expensive everything was, about how nothing in the house belonged to the little girl. The maid heard him say once that the child was not his responsibility. That sentence stayed with her. One morning, the maid returned from the market earlier than usual. She had a strange feeling in her chest, like something was wrong. As she approached the house, she saw the front door open. The little girl was sitting on the ground near the steps. A small bag lay beside her. The girl looked up when she saw the maid. Her eyes were red, but she was not crying. She looked confused, as if she was waiting for instructions. The maid's heart dropped. Before she could ask anything, the stepfather appeared in the doorway. His face was hard. He said the girl was leaving. He said she was not welcome anymore. He said she was not his problem. The maid tried to speak, but he cut her off. He told her to mind her own business. He told her to go back to work. The little girl clutched the bag tighter. The maid stood there, frozen between fear and something stronger she had never felt before. Something inside her broke. She looked at the child. Then she looked at the man. And for the first time since she started working in that house, she did not lower her eyes. She stepped forward, and that was the moment everything began to change. This is part 1 ongoing. I will continue automatically in the next message, keeping the same tone, pacing, and realism. Until part 1 reaches 9,500 plus complete words, do not worry, I will not rush, and I will not repeat content. The maid did not know how long she stood there. It could have been seconds or minutes. Time felt strange in that moment, stretched thin like it might tear. The little girl kept looking from the maid to the stepfather, waiting for someone to say something that made sense. No one did. The stepfather crossed his arms and repeated himself, slower this time, as if speaking to someone foolish. He said the girl had to go. He said he had done enough. He said the house was no place for her anymore. His voice was flat, without anger now, which somehow made it worse. The maid swallowed hard. Her hands were shaking, but she kept them at her side so no one would see. She asked where the child was supposed to go. The stepfather shrugged. He said it was not his concern. He turned and walked back inside, leaving the door open behind him. The maid looked down at the little girl. The child's shoes were worn, her dress too thin for the cool air. The bag beside her was small and uneven, stuffed without care. It held a few clothes, nothing more. No toys, no memories, no comfort. The maid knelt slowly, careful not to frighten her. She asked if the stepfather had said anything else. The girl shook her head. She said he told her to take the bag and sit outside. She said she thought he would come back and tell her it was a mistake. The maid felt something tighten in her chest. She told the girl to wait. Just a moment. She stood and went inside the house. Her steps were steady, but her mind was racing. She knew this moment mattered. Whatever she did next would change everything. Inside, the house looked the same as always. Clean floors, neat furniture, quiet rooms. It did not look like a place where a child had just been thrown away. The stepfather stood near the table pouring himself a drink. The maid spoke, her voice calm but firm. She said the girl could not be sent away like that. She said it was wrong. She said the mother would never have allowed it. At the mention of the mother, the stepfather's face twisted. He slammed the glass down and told the maid to stop talking. He reminded her who paid her wages. He said if she did not like how things were done, she could leave too. The maid felt fear, sharp and familiar. She had known fear her whole life. Fear of hunger. Fear of being alone. Fear of having nothing. But now, standing there, she felt something else rise above it. She said she would not leave the girl outside. The stepfather laughed, a short and bitter sound. He said she could not stop him. He said the girl was no one to her. The maid did not answer. She turned and walked back outside. The little girl looked up at her with wide eyes. The maid took her hand. She felt how cold it was. She wrapped her shawl around the child's shoulders and pulled her close. She told her they would figure something out. She told her she was not alone. The stepfather watched from the doorway but did not move. Perhaps he thought the maid would give up. Perhaps he thought fear would win. But the maid stayed. Neighbors began to notice. A woman across the road stopped and stared. A man slowed his steps. Whispers moved through the air. The stepfather's face hardened. He did not like attention. Finally, he stepped forward and told the maid to take the girl and leave his property. The maid nodded. She gathered the bag, lifted the child gently, and walked away from the house. Her legs felt weak, but she did not stop. She did not look back. They walked down the road together. The little girl did not cry. She was too tired for tears. She leaned into the maid, trusting her without question. The maid's home was small. One room, old furniture, a narrow bed. It was not much, but it was safe. She sat the girl down and gave her water. She found a piece of bread and broke it in half, handing the larger part to the child. That night, the girl slept curled beside her, breathing softly. The maid lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She knew the stepfather would not let this go quietly. She knew trouble would come, but she also knew she could not turn back. In the days that followed, the maid moved carefully. She kept the girl inside, away from the road. She spoke to a neighbor she trusted, someone who had known the mother. She asked questions. She listened. She learned things she had not known before. The mother had been careful. She had worried about the future. She had spoken to people quietly, made arrangements, left instructions. There were papers. There were promises. The maid felt a mix of relief and anger. Relief that the girl was not as helpless as she seemed. Anger that the stepfather had tried to erase that. The girl began to speak more in the maid's home. Slowly at first, she asked where her mother was now. She asked why her stepfather did not want her. She asked if she had done something wrong. The maid answered gently. She told her none of this was her fault. She told her adults sometimes make cruel choices. She told her she was loved. The girl listened. She believed her. Outside, the world kept moving. The stepfather told people the maid had stolen the child. He said she had crossed a line. Some believed him. Some did not. The maid stayed calm. She knew the truth had a way of finding its voice. One evening, a visitor came. Someone sent by a local office. Questions were asked. Papers were requested. The maid told everything as it was. She did not exaggerate. She did not hide. The little girl sat quietly, holding the maid's hand. As the days passed, the weight that had pressed on the child began to lift. She laughed once, softly, at a silly story. The sound surprised them both. The maid smiled through tears. This was only the beginning. Hard days still lay ahead. But something had shifted. The cruelty that had ruled the house no longer had control, and for the first time since her mother's death, the little girl felt safe enough to hope. The days after leaving the house felt unreal, as if the little girl had stepped into a life that did not belong to her yet. She woke each morning in the maid's small room and took a few seconds to remember where she was. Sometimes she reached out, expecting to touch her mother's arm. When she did not, a quiet sadness settled in her chest, but it did not feel as sharp as before. There was warmth here. There was safety. The maid kept her routine simple. She woke early, prepared a modest breakfast, and made sure the girl ate slowly and properly. She brushed the child's hair with care, the same way the mother used to. She spoke softly, choosing her words carefully, knowing how easily fear could return. The girl watched everything closely. She noticed how the maid counted coins before going to the market. She noticed how the woman sighed sometimes when she thought no one was looking. But she also noticed the way the maid always smiled at her, even when tired. That smile mattered more than anything. At night, the girl slept better than she had in months. There were no angry voices here. No sudden footsteps. No feeling that she had to disappear to survive. She slept deeply, her small body finally resting. The maid, however, slept lightly. She knew the stepfather would not accept this quietly. She knew he would feel challenged, embarrassed, exposed. Men like him did not like losing control, especially in front of others. She prepared herself for whatever might come next, even though she was unsure how she would face it. On the third day, word reached her that the stepfather had gone around the neighborhood telling his version of the story. He said the maid had taken the child without permission. He said she had no right. He said she was overstepping her place. Some people listened. Some nodded. Others asked questions. The maid did not respond immediately. She focused on the child instead. She took her outside during the day, letting her feel the sun on her face. She taught her small chores, turning them into games. She praised her often, rebuilding confidence piece by piece. The girl began to talk more. She spoke about her mother, sharing memories she had kept locked inside. She spoke about the house, about how quiet it had become, about how scared she had felt sitting outside with her bag. The maid listened without interrupting. She did not rush the child. She let the words come when they were ready. One afternoon, someone knocked on the door. The maid's heart jumped, but she stayed calm. She opened the door to find a local official, polite but serious. He explained he was there to check on the situation. He asked if the girl was safe. The maid stepped aside and invited him in. She answered every question honestly. She did not exaggerate the stepfather's cruelty, but she did not soften it either. She spoke clearly, steadily, her voice firm despite her nerves. The girl sat quietly on the bed, her hands folded in her lap. She looked at the floor when questions were asked, but when the maid reached out and held her hand, she lifted her eyes. The official took notes. He asked about the mother, about the funeral, about what had happened that morning outside the house. When he left, he said the situation would be reviewed. He said more people might come. He said the maid had done the right thing by keeping the child safe that night. The maid allowed herself to breathe a little easier, but the calm did not last long. The stepfather arrived. 2 days later, he stood outside the maid's door, his face tight with anger. He demanded the girl be returned. He accused the maid of turning people against him. He said she would regret interfering. The maid did not raise her voice. She told him the child would not be going back. She told him authorities were aware. She told him to leave. The girl stood behind her, clutching her dress. The stepfather sneered and said the maid was nothing. He said she could not win this. He said the girl would end up worse because of her. The maid closed the door, her hands shook after, but she did not let the girl see. She knelt down and told her everything would be fine. She did not know if it was true, but she believed it had to be. That evening, neighbors came by quietly. One brought food. Another offered blankets. Someone else shared information about the mother's past arrangements. Pieces began to come together. It became clear that the mother had been more careful than anyone knew. She had spoken to a community elder months before her death. She had worried about what might happen if she was gone. She had asked for help just in case. Documents had been prepared. Instructions given. The maid felt a deep respect for the woman she had served. Even in illness, she had thought of her child first. The girl listened as the maid explained things slowly, in words she could understand. She was told she had not been abandoned by her mother. She was told her mother had planned for her safety, for the first time since the funeral. The girl smiled fully. School became the next question. The maid wanted the girl to return, to feel normal again. Arrangements were discussed. Support was offered. The stepfather tried to interfere, but his voice no longer carried weight. Too many people were watching now. Too many questions were being asked. The girl stepped into a new routine. Mornings were filled with learning. Afternoons with quiet play. Evenings with stories. Life was still fragile, but it was no longer broken. The maid remained careful. She knew healing took time. She knew trust did not return all at once. She gave the girl space when she needed it, and comfort when she asked. Sometimes. Late at night, the maid thought about her own life, about how she had never imagined becoming someone's protector, about how fear had once ruled her choices. Now, courage had taken its place. The girl began to laugh more often. Not loudly, not yet, but enough to fill the small room with warmth. She started to plan things again, small hopes like what she wanted to learn next, what stories she liked best. Outside, the stepfather grew quieter. His threats faded. His power slipped away. What he had tried to destroy was being rebuilt, slowly, carefully, with love instead of fear. And this was only the beginning of a much longer journey. Life did not become easy just because the girl was safe. Safety was only the first step, not the end. Once the fear stopped pressing on her chest every moment, other feelings began to surface. Confusion came first, then sadness, then questions that had no simple answers. The maid noticed these changes quietly. She had lived long enough to understand that pain does not disappear just because danger is gone. It changes shape, it waits, and then it asks to be heard. Some mornings, the girl woke up cheerful, talking about school and small plans for the day. Other mornings, she sat on the edge of the bed, silent and distant, staring at nothing. On those days, the maid did not push. She sat nearby, doing small tasks, letting the girl know she was not alone. The girl started asking about the house she had left behind, not with longing, but with confusion. She wanted to know why it had stopped feeling like home. She wanted to know when things had gone wrong. She wanted to know if her mother had known how bad it would become. The maid answered carefully. She did not speak badly of the dead, and she did not excuse cruelty. She told the girl that adults make mistakes, sometimes very serious ones. She told her that love should never be taken away as punishment. At school, the girl struggled at first. She was behind in some things, and too quiet in others. Teachers noticed her fear of doing something wrong. They noticed how she flinched at raised voices. Even when no anger was meant, the maid worked closely with them, explaining only what was necessary. She protected the girl's story, sharing it only with those who needed to know. She wanted the child to grow without being labeled by her pain. Slowly, things improved. The girl made one friend, then another. She began to smile more freely. She started bringing home drawings and stories. She showed them to the maid with pride, waiting for approval. The maid praised her honestly, never exaggerating, never holding back warmth. Meanwhile, stepfather did not disappear completely. He stayed at a distance, but his presence lingered like a shadow. Occasionally, the maid heard rumors. He complained to anyone who would listen. He said he had been wronged. He said people had turned against him unfairly, but when questions were asked directly, he avoided them. The maid knew this phase would not last forever. Truth had a way of demanding clarity, and clarity was coming. One afternoon, the maid received a message asking her to come to a local office with the girl. Papers needed to be reviewed. Statements needed to be confirmed. The maid prepared carefully. She explained to the girl what would happen, using simple words. She told her she only had to speak if she felt comfortable. She told her there were no right or wrong answers. She told her the truth mattered more than anything else. The girl nodded, nervous but trusting. At the office, they were treated with respect. The girl was given time. She was spoken to gently. No one rushed her. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. She described what life had been like after her mother's death. She described sitting outside with her bag. She described waiting, thinking it was all a misunderstanding. There were pauses. There were tears. But there was also strength. The maid watched with pride and sorrow mixed together. No child should have to be strong like this. But here she was, telling her story with honesty. The stepfather was called in later. He tried to defend himself. He changed details. He blamed grief. He blamed stress. But his words did not line up with the facts. Too many people had seen too much. Too many pieces fit together in a way he could not undo. The process took time. Weeks passed. Life continued in between meetings and paperwork. The girl went to school. The maid worked when she could. Neighbors helped quietly, without expecting anything in return. Through it all, the girl changed. She stood straighter. She spoke more confidently. She learned that her voice mattered, that adults could listen, that the world was not only made of fear and loss. One evening, she asked the maid a question that stopped her heart. She asked if the maid would stay with her. No matter what happened next, the maid did not answer right away. She knelt down and looked the girl in the eyes. She told her she could not promise forever, because forever was a big word. But she promised she would not walk away. She promised she would stand by her as long as she was needed. That was enough. The girl hugged her tightly, holding on as if afraid she might disappear. Outside, the world moved on. But inside that small home, something important was being rebuilt. Not just a life, but trust. The stepfather's power continued to fade. The more truth came out, the quieter he became. People stopped listening to him. They started seeing him clearly. The girl no longer waited for him to change. She no longer hoped he would suddenly become kind. She understood, in her own way, that some people choose cruelty. It has nothing to do with the child who suffers it. This understanding did not make her bitter. It made her free. She began dreaming again. Small dreams at first, then bigger ones. She talked about what she wanted to learn, what she wanted to be when she grew older. The maid listened and encouraged, never laughing, never dismissing. Healing did not happen all at once. Some nights, the girl still cried quietly. Some memories still hurt. But now, when the tears came, there were arms to hold her, and that made all the difference. As time passed, the world around the girl and the maid began to shift in quiet but powerful ways. The crisis, that had once felt sharp and immediate, slowly turned into something deeper and more complex. It was no longer just about safety. It was about belonging, stability, and the long work of building a life that could last. The maid noticed that the girl no longer asked every morning what would happen next. At first, those questions had come daily. Would she have to leave again? Would someone take her away? Would she wake up one day and find herself alone? Now, those fears still existed, but they no longer ruled every thought. The girl began to settle into routines. She knew what time she would wake up. She knew where her clothes were kept. She knew which days were for school and which were quieter. These small certainties mattered more than anyone realized. They were the foundation of trust. The maid made sure the girl was involved in decisions, even small ones. She asked what food she preferred. She asked how she liked her hair done. She asked which stories she wanted to hear before sleep. Each question was a reminder that her voice mattered. At school, teachers began to notice the change. The girl participated more. She raised her hand sometimes. She laughed with friends without looking over her shoulder. The fear that once followed her like a shadow had softened into something manageable, but healing did not erase the past. There were moments when something small brought it all back. A loud argument in the street, a sharp tone from an adult, a sudden change in routine. In those moments, the girl's body reacted before her mind could. Her shoulders tensed. Her breath became shallow. Her eyes searched for an exit. The maid learned to recognize these signs. She never scolded. She never asked why. She simply moved closer, offering quiet reassurance. Sometimes that was enough. Sometimes the girl needed time alone. The maid respected both. Meanwhile, the situation with the stepfather continued to move forward, slowly but steadily. Decisions were being made by people who took their responsibilities seriously. Documents were reviewed. Statements were compared. The truth, which had once been ignored, now stood clearly on record. The stepfather grew increasingly withdrawn. He stopped speaking publicly. He avoided places where questions might be asked. His confidence, once loud and sharp, had faded into something defensive and brittle. The maid did not celebrate this. She felt no joy in his fall. Her focus remained on the girl and what she needed to grow. One afternoon, the girl asked a question that surprised her. She asked if she would ever see the stepfather again. The maid paused before answering. She chose her words carefully. She said it was possible, but it did not mean the man would be part of her life in the same way. She said some people leave permanent marks, but they do not get to decide the future. The girl thought about this quietly. Then she nodded, as if accepting a truth she had already felt. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. Seasons changed. The air cooled. Leaves fell and returned again. Life continued. The maid's home remained modest, but it grew warmer in ways that had nothing to do with money. Laughter filled the space more often now. The girl began to invite friends over, something she had never done before. The maid welcomed them kindly, offering simple snacks and gentle smiles. Neighbors noticed the change too. They saw how the girl walked with confidence now. They saw how she spoke freely. They saw the bond between her and the maid, strong and natural. Some people asked questions quietly. They wondered if the maid planned to stay forever. If she would take on a permanent role? If the girl would eventually be placed elsewhere? The maid did not rush these questions. She knew that forcing answers before they were ready could cause more harm than good. Inside herself,
However,
she thought about the future often. She wondered what it meant to care for someone so deeply. She wondered what sacrifices she was willing to make. She wondered if love alone was enough. The girl, for her part, began to imagine a future that included the maid without fear of losing her. She spoke about growing up in that small home. She spoke about wanting to help others someday, the way she had been helped. One evening, after a long day, the girl sat beside the maid and asked her to tell the story of how they met again. Not the painful parts, but the moment the maid chose to step forward. She wanted to hear it again, as if repeating it made it more real. The maid told the story simply. She said she saw a child who needed someone. She said she listened to her heart instead of her fear. She said that sometimes doing the right thing feels impossible until you do it. The girl listened closely, absorbing every word. Outside forces continued to shape their lives. Officials checked in regularly, making sure the girl's needs were being met. Support systems were discussed. Long-term plans were formed. The maid participated in these conversations openly. She did not pretend to have all the answers. She spoke honestly about her limitations and her commitment. People respected that. Gradually, a clearer picture emerged, one that did not involve sudden changes or forced separations, one that prioritized stability and care. The girl sensed this shift before it was ever explained to her. Children often feel things long before they are told. She grew calmer. She worried less. She allowed herself to believe. Still, there were nights when memories returned without warning. The girl would wake from dreams that felt too real. Dreams of sitting outside the house with her bag. Dreams of waiting for a door to open. On those nights, the maid held her until the shaking stopped. She whispered steady words. She reminded her that she was safe, that the door would not close again. Slowly, those nights became fewer. The girl began to understand that strength did not mean forgetting. It meant carrying the past without letting it control her. The maid learned something too. She learned that courage was not a single moment, but a series of quiet choices made every day. She learned that standing up once was not enough. Staying required even more bravery. Together, they continued forward, step by step, shaping a life built not on fear or loss, but on care and choice. And while the world outside still held uncertainty, inside that small home, something unshakable was taking root. The end did not arrive suddenly. It came quietly, built from many small moments that slowly formed something lasting. By the time anyone noticed, the girl was no longer just surviving. She was living, She woke one morning and realized she no longer felt afraid of the day ahead. The thought surprised her. Fear had once been the first thing she felt when opening her eyes. Now, there was curiosity instead. There were plans. There was a sense of belonging that had grown, so naturally she had not noticed when it took root. The maid saw the change too. It was in the way the girl walked, her steps light and confident. It was in how she spoke to adults, no longer shrinking her voice. It was in how she laughed freely, without checking first to see if it was allowed. Time had done what fear could not. It had softened the sharp edges of the past. The girl had grown taller. Her face still carried traces of what she had been through, but they no longer defined her. Sadness still visited, but it no longer stayed. It came and went like weather, no longer a permanent storm. The maid watched her with quiet pride. She never said much about it. She believed some things were meant to be felt, not spoken. Still, there were moments when she looked at the girl and felt overwhelmed by how far they had come. The house they lived in remained small, but it had become full of sound, full of routine, full of memories that did not hurt. The girl helped more now, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She swept the floor, prepared simple meals, and took care of small tasks with confidence. Each action reminded her that she was capable, trusted, and needed. School had become a place of growth rather than fear. She excelled in some subjects and struggled in others, but she no longer felt ashamed of mistakes. Teachers noticed her determination. Friends noticed her kindness. She had learned early how much difference one person's care could make. Sometimes classmates asked about her past. She answered only what she wished to share. She had learned that her story belonged to her. She did not owe it to anyone. The maid encouraged this independence. She wanted the girl to know she was strong on her own, even while supported. She did not cling. She guided as official matters slowly reached their conclusion. The girl's future became clearer. Decisions were finalized with care and respect. Stability was chosen over disruption. Love was valued over convenience. The stepfather faded completely from their lives. There was no dramatic confrontation at the end. No final words exchanged. His presence simply disappeared, like something no longer relevant. The girl did not ask about him anymore. She had released the need to understand his cruelty. What mattered now was what lay ahead. One evening, the girl sat with the maid and spoke about her dreams. Not grand dreams of wealth or fame, but simple ones. She spoke about helping others, about standing up for someone who felt small, about becoming someone safe. The maid listened. Her eyes filled with quiet tears. She realized then that the girl had not only healed, she had transformed her pain into understanding. The seasons changed again. The girl celebrated milestones she had once believed she would never reach. Birthdays passed with laughter instead of fear. Achievements were celebrated without conditions. The maid grew older. She felt it in her bones, in her slower steps. But she felt lighter than she ever had before. Caring for the girl had given her life a meaning she had not known she was missing. There were challenges still. Life never became perfect. There were arguments, misunderstandings, moments of doubt. But they faced them together, honestly, without fear. One day, the girl asked the maid if she was afraid when she had stepped forward that first time. The maid smiled gently and admitted she had been terrified. She said courage did not mean being fearless. It meant acting despite fear. The girl nodded, understanding deeply. Years later, when people spoke of the girl's strength, they often wondered where it came from. They pointed to her resilience, her compassion, her calm confidence. Few knew the full story, but the girl did. She knew her strength had been born. The day someone chose to stand between her and cruelty. She knew it grew because someone stayed, and she carried that knowledge forward, quietly. Determined to be that person for someone else one day, the end of the story was not an ending at all. It was a beginning that lasted. Time did not stop once peace arrived. It kept moving forward, quietly shaping the girl into someone new, while still carrying traces of who she had been. Growing up did not erase her past, but it changed how she carried it. What once felt like a weight slowly became a lesson, something that guided her choices instead of controlling them. The girl was no longer small. Her voice had strength now, not because it was loud, but because it was sure of itself. She understood when to speak and when to stay quiet. She understood the value of listening, something she had learned early from watching the maid, who always listened before acting. Their days followed a steady rhythm. Mornings began with shared chores and simple meals. Afternoons were filled with schoolwork, quiet conversations, and moments of laughter that came naturally. Evenings brought reflection, sometimes spoken, sometimes silent. The maid noticed that the girl no longer needed constant reassurance. She trusted the world more now. She trusted herself. Still, there were moments when old memories surfaced. They came without warning, often during times of change. A new school year, a new responsibility, a reminder that life could shift suddenly. During those moments, the girl did not panic. She paused. She breathed. She remembered what she had learned. Fear no longer decided her actions. The maid watched these changes with mixed emotions. Pride filled her heart, but so did a quiet awareness that the girl was growing toward independence. That was the goal, she reminded herself. Love was not meant to hold someone still. It was meant to help them move forward. One evening, the girl returned home thoughtful and quiet. She had encountered someone at school who spoke harshly. Someone who reminded her of a past she rarely thought about anymore. The words had not hurt in the same way, but they had stirred something old. She told the maid about it without tears, without anger. She simply explained how it made her feel. The maid listened carefully. She did not rush to fix the feeling. She asked what the girl thought about it herself. The girl answered honestly. She said she realized the words had power only if she let them. She said she understood that cruelty often came from weakness, not strength. The maid smiled. Deeply moved, that night the girl slept peacefully. Something that once seemed impossible. As the years continued, the girl took on more responsibility. She helped others when she saw them struggling. She stood up quietly when something felt wrong. She did not seek praise. She simply acted. People began to notice her character. Teachers respected her. Friends trusted her. Younger children looked up to her without knowing why. The maid knew why. She had seen the girl at her lowest point. She had seen her fear, her confusion, her heartbreak. She had also seen her courage grow from the smallest seed into something steady and reliable. There were moments when the maid felt tired. When age reminded her of its presence, the girl noticed this too. She began helping more, insisting gently, just as the maid once had. Their roles shifted naturally, without discussion. Care flowed both ways now. One afternoon, the girl asked the maid a question that reflected just how much she had grown. She asked what the maid had learned from everything they had been through together. The maid thought for a long time before answering. She said she had learned that ordinary people could change lives without realizing it. She said she had learned that doing the right thing rarely felt easy, but it always felt right afterward. The girl listened carefully. Storing those words somewhere deep, life continued to unfold with its usual mix of joy and challenge. There were setbacks, disappointments, moments of doubt. But there was also resilience, honesty, and an unbreakable sense of self. The girl no longer measured her worth by how others treated her. She measured it by how she treated others, and that made all the difference. As the girl grew older, the world around her began to look different. Not because it had changed, but because she had. Things she once feared now appeared smaller, easier to face. Things she once ignored now seemed important. Life had a way of reshaping itself when viewed through new eyes. The maid noticed this change slowly, the way one notices the shift of seasons rather than a sudden storm. The girl asked deeper questions now, not just about what happened, but why it happened. Not just about her own past, but about people, choices, and fairness. They talked often in the evenings after the day had settled. The girl would sit nearby while the maid worked with her hands, and words would come naturally. Sometimes they spoke about school, sometimes about people they knew, and sometimes about nothing in particular. One evening, The girl asked why some adults hurt children instead of protecting them. The question was simple, but the answer was not. The maid took her time. She said, "Some people carry pain they never learned to face, and instead of healing, they pass it on." She said it was never the child's fault. She said protecting the innocent was one of the greatest responsibilities a person could have. The girl listened quietly. She did not look angry. She looked thoughtful. From that day on, the girl became more aware of others around her. She noticed when someone felt left out. She noticed when someone stayed quiet too long. She noticed fear in places she once did not see. At school, she began to sit beside those who had no one. She spoke up gently when someone was treated unfairly. She did not act loudly or dramatically. She simply refused to ignore wrongness. Teachers noticed her maturity. Friends trusted her judgment. Younger children felt safe near her without knowing why. The maid watched all of this with quiet pride and a hint of concern. She knew the weight of caring deeply for others. She knew it could be heavy if not balanced with kindness toward oneself, so she reminded the girl often that it was okay to rest, that it was okay to step back, that being strong did not mean carrying everything alone. The girl understood, even if she did not always practice it as time passed. The girl faced new challenges that had nothing to do with her past: disappointments, failures, moments where effort did not lead to success. These moments tested her in new ways. Once, after a difficult day, she came home frustrated and silent. The maid waited. She did not ask questions right away. She knew silence could be part of processing. Later, the girl spoke. She said she felt like she had let herself down. She said she feared becoming weak. The maid corrected her gently. She said weakness was not failing. Weakness was giving up on one's values. She said learning often came from falling short. The girl took this to heart. She began to see life not as a test to pass, but as a path to walk. Some days were smooth, others were rough. Both mattered. The memory of the stepfather no longer carried emotion. It existed, but it did not command attention. The girl no longer defined herself by what he had done. She defined herself by what she chose to do. That shift was powerful. One afternoon, the girl helped someone through a difficult moment. It was small, barely noticeable to others, but it mattered deeply to the person she helped. Later, she told the maid about it, not with pride, but with quiet reflection. She said she finally understood something important. She said the maid's choice long ago had not just saved her, but had taught her how to live. The maid felt tears rise, but she smiled. She told the girl that the greatest impact a person could have was not changing the whole world, but changing one life in a meaningful way. The girl nodded. She already knew. As days turned into years, the girl continued to grow into herself. She carried compassion without losing strength. She carried wisdom without losing warmth. She carried her past without being trapped by it. The maid remained by her side, no longer as a protector alone, but as a guide, a witness, and a quiet source of support. Their bond did not need constant words. It was understood life still held uncertainty. It always would. But the girl had learned something essential. She had learned that even in the darkest moments, someone choosing courage could change everything, and she intended to be that someone whenever she could. The girl reached a stage in her life where quiet reflection became more important than loud moments. She no longer rushed through days trying to prove anything. She moved with purpose now, choosing her actions carefully, understanding that every choice carried weight. The maid noticed this shift with mixed emotions. She had always known this day would come, the day when guidance would slowly turn into trust. The girl no longer needed constant direction. She needed space to decide who she wanted to be. Their mornings remained familiar. Shared meals, soft conversation, comfortable silence. But there was a new layer to it all, sense of mutual respect that went beyond care and protection. The girl had started thinking deeply about the future, not in a fearful way, but with curiosity. She wondered what kind of adult she would become. She wondered how her past would shape her, and how much control she truly had over that shaping. One evening, She asked the maid whether people were defined more by what happened to them or by what they did afterward. The maid paused, considering the question carefully. She said life offered everyone a starting point they did not choose. Some started with comfort, others with struggle. But the direction they walked afterward mattered more than the place they began. The girl sat with that answer for a long time. At school and in the community, she began taking on small responsibilities. Not because she was asked, but because she felt ready. She helped organize events. She supported younger students. She listened when someone needed to talk. People trusted her naturally. They sensed her steadiness, her sincerity. She did not pretend to know everything. She asked questions. She admitted when she was unsure. The maid watched this growth with quiet pride and gentle concern. She knew that leadership, even quiet leadership, could be demanding. She reminded the girl often to care for herself as much as she cared for others. The girl appreciated the reminder, even if she sometimes forgot it. As time passed, memories of the past returned less often. But when they did, they arrived differently. They no longer brought fear or anger. They brought understanding. The girl could look back without feeling small. She remembered sitting outside the house with her bag. She remembered the confusion, the waiting, the silence. But now, those memories felt distant, like pages from a book she had already finished reading. They mattered, but they did not trap her. One afternoon, the girl encountered someone who reminded her strongly of her stepfather. The tone of voice, the dismissive manner, the sense of control. For a brief moment, her chest tightened, but then she breathed. She recognized the feeling. She acknowledged it. She let it pass. Later, she told the maid about the experience. She did not speak with fear or bitterness. She spoke with awareness. She said she realized that not every reminder had power over her anymore. The maid smiled, deeply moved. That realization marked an important turning point. The girl no longer reacted to the past. She responded to the present. Their conversations grew deeper. They spoke about responsibility, fairness, and the kind of world they wished existed. They spoke about kindness that did not weaken strength, and strength that did not harm kindness. The girl expressed a desire to work someday in a role where she could protect others, especially those who felt unheard. She did not say this with dramatic passion. She said it calmly, as if stating something she already knew. The maid listened carefully. She did not push or question. She trusted the girl's instincts. Life continued to test them both in small ways. There were disagreements, moments of frustration, times when exhaustion made patience thin. But their bond had matured enough to handle conflict without breaking. They talked things through. They apologized when needed. They learned from each other. One evening, as they sat quietly, the girl asked if the maid ever regretted her choice. The maid answered honestly. She said there had been moments of fear, moments of doubt, moments when the weight felt heavy, but she said regret had never been one of them. She said some choices change a life so completely that they become part of who you are. She said this was one of those choices. The girl nodded, understanding deeply. As the years continued, the girl began stepping more confidently into the wider world. She took opportunities. She faced challenges. She made mistakes and learned from them. The maid remained her steady presence, no longer guiding every step, but always available when needed. Their relationship had evolved into something strong and balanced, not built on dependency, but on respect, gratitude, and shared history. The girl knew now that her story was not defined by cruelty, loss, or abandonment. It was defined by courage, care, and choice, and she carried that truth with her wherever she went.